day here in South London. I hope everyone else has got a nice bit of sunshine to see you through the day. So I'm really delighted to introduce today's paper. Dr. Manuel's research interests span quite a few different topics, so tense, aspect and mood in French as a first and second language, also French language, its history and evolution more generally, and also French in Belgium and Brussels. Emmanuel is also the director of our brand new sparkling Centre for Applied Linguistics, which we're hoping to launch soon. And Emmanuel has also organised this excellent series of Through the Language Lens. So for today's paper then, the usual virtual talk etiquette applies, please. So if I could ask that everyone keeps themselves muted, and if you have any questions throughout the paper, please feel free to pop a question in the chat or wait until the end and I'll take your question then otherwise. So Emmanuel will be speaking today on when a pronoun makes the French yell, a not so neutral controversy. And I should say bravo to your title, Emmanuel, because it wasn't until I read it out loud earlier on today that I realised the pun there. So the floor is yours and feel free to take it away.
Thank you very much, Chloe. Yes, I'm very well known for my puns. Usually they are in French, but I'm working interlinguistically nowadays. So I guess it's a good sign that my English is improving. Okay, so welcome everybody and thank you for joining us this lunchtime. I was delighted to see that there was quite a bit of interest in the topic. And I would like to start with a disclaimer because this topic of inclusive language is not a topic on which I have published or I have extensively researched, but I've come to this topic through unusual means, maybe, because about 3 years ago I was asked to take over a module that was about French politics and society, which obviously I know nothing about. So I was just wondering, well, how can I make that relevant to our students? And being a linguist, well, it was quite obvious to me that looking at languages was the way forward and at contemporary issues in French societies. So I picked up a few issues such as regional languages, langue des banlieues, and inclusive language. And it was a good choice, I think, because it's the gift that keeps giving. Every year there is something new, some new controversy. It started with the publication of a history manual for primary school pupils in 2017. And basically each year I've got something new to discuss with my students. So I have come from that learning and teaching interest first. And also more recently, we have in our college developed a new committee for EDI issues. So I'm the representative for our department, and yeah, I mean, that made me think also about issues about equality, diversity and inclusion, and all the linguistic aspect again of that has attracted my attention. So here is the angle from which I've come to that issues, and I'm sure that some of you may have more erudite views on the topic, so please feel free to contribute and we'll have a discussion later on. I think Natasha has said that we've decided to record the talk but not the discussion so that people are free to express whatever they want to express. So that was my disclaimer, and now this is a quick overview of my talk, so you know where we're going, and maybe if I bore you to death, you know, oh, well, she's almost done now, so you know where we're going. So I will first set the background for the controversy, how it all started, so that will be my first point. I will then ask the question, why is there such a debate going on? And then we'll come to maybe more linguistic consideration about that pronoun yell and all the challenges it presents in the French language. but not only at the linguistic level, but also at the level of society. I see, Chloe, that there are some conversation by people who may be in the room you were in to start with. So it might
Yes,
be worth.
thanks, Manuel. Yeah, I've just noticed that. I don't know what I think somehow we've got a duplication of the event. So let me just try and get everyone else over to here.
Okay. So
But
shall I maybe pause and wait for people to join us in this room?
I think carry on, and I'll do what I can behind the scenes. I think that'll probably be the easiest thing to do,
Okay.
Manuel, if
Okay.
that's okay.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Okay, so let us start, and let's hope that people will be able to join us as we go. So how did that controversy start? Well, the offensive document is here. I've just taken a screenshot of what sparkled the discussion. So what happened is that in October last year, the dictionary Le Robert published on his online website, online version of the dictionary that works a bit like a sandpit for them to test and try new words that may make it into the paper version of the dictionary. And one of those words was yell. So I just gloss it for those of you who may not have much French. So the definition is a personal pronoun that is rare of the third person singular and plural. And it is used to refer to a person, whatever their gender. The use of the yell pronoun in inclusive communication, and note that it is also spelled yell, double L, E. So that's what started the discussion. Well, to start with, there wasn't much of a discussion until the 16th of November. And what happened on the 16th of November? Well, there was a tweet by François Jolivet, who is a member of the parliament for the region of Indre in France, and who belongs to La République En Marche, which is the party of the French president Emmanuel Macron. So what the tweet was saying was the following. So the Petit Robert, a dictionary that we saw to be a reference, has just integrated on his website the words yell, 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 yell. I'm sorry, in French, you pronounce them all the same. Its authors are therefore the militants of a cause that has nothing of French wokeism. I've written to the French Academy and the letter to the French Academy. If you're not familiar with the French context, you may miss the significance of that tweet, and especially the last line. I've written to the French Academy. The French Academy is quite an institution in the French context. It was founded in 1635 by Richelieu, who was in a way the prime minister at the time, although that was not a concept there. And he was a quite astute politician who had understood the importance of language in politics as a way of unifying the country and reinforcing the power of the king at the time. So the aim of the French Academy was to basically clean the language of all the problems and things that have come into it, and to write a grammar and a dictionary. They haven't written the grammar yet, and the dictionary is not very far, so they haven't done a very good job at it. The problem might be that there have been very few linguists actually sitting there, but still for the lay person in France and the French-speaking country, there is some prestige attached to the French Academy, hence the reference. That statement by François Jolivet was immediately relayed by Jean-Michel Blanquer, who is the French education minister. So Jean-Michel Blanquer tweets, I obviously support the protest by François Jolivet against Le Petit Robert. And inclusive writing is not the future of the French language. While our pupils are just about to consolidate their basic knowledge, they couldn't possibly have it, so inclusive writing, as their reference. Jean-Michel Blanquer has been somebody who hasn't got the full support of teachers and intellectuals, to say the least. So he's been a bit teased about all his position about language. For example, he's been vocal about teaching the past historic in schools in France, and he's been caught on camera in a primary school classroom talking about the past historic and actually making quite a few mistakes and being corrected by primary school kids. So, well, for some people, you know, they like to joke a bit about him. So there were lots of cartoons in the press, such as this one about inclusive writing and calling Jean-Michel Blanquer, Jean-Michel. It's so support in the higher sphere, and also by maybe the most famous or infamous, I'm not sure which word is most appropriate, French teacher of the country. That's to say Brigitte Macron, who is here together with Jean-Michel Blanquer. And as they are discussing, they are being asked about that Yale controversy, says, well, the French language is beautiful, 2 pronouns, that's good. Right. Welcome. Maybe if you've joined us and not mute yourself, it would be a good idea, because we've got some sound. Thank you very much. So that may be a link here with some debates. If you're following what's happening on Twitter in France, you may have seen that there was a lot being said about Brigitte Macron, née Trogneux. And there are some discussion at the moment on Twitter, according to which Brigitte Macron would in fact be a trans woman, and she would have been born Jean-Michel. So there is a link here, Jean-Michel Trogneux. So that doesn't fit too well with that trans identity, because she should have supported Yale, I think, if that was the position. But this is maybe something for the question, and I won't go further on that very slippery slope. Well, obviously, because there'd been reaction in the higher sphere. Well, there was a need for a response from the Robert, and that's what happened the next day on the 17th of November. The CEO of the publishing house, Le Robert, stated the following. Over the last few months, researchers at the Robert have noticed a growing use of the word Yale. The frequency of use of a word is studied through the statistical analysis of vast corpora from different sources. Through this constant watch, that allows us to notice the emergence of new words, of phrases, of meaning. Moreover, the meaning of the word Yale is not understandable at first sight. In the lingo of lexicographer, they would say that it's not transparent. So it has appeared quite useful to us to specify its meaning for those who come across it, whether they wish to use that word or, on the other hand, to reject it completely. And I'd like to bring your attention to some of the wording here. Celles et ceux. So celles et ceux are the demonstrative pronouns. Celles is the feminine form and ceux the masculine form. And this is a formula that President Macron is very fond of. And it's a nod to inclusive writing. This is one of the most mainstream formula of public speech in French that wants to be inclusive. So that was, well, a disagreement, people not quite in favor of the introduction of a new word, but why was there such a controversy? I'd like to come back to the letter that François Jolivet sent to the French Academy. And one of the points that he was making there is that basically Yale was a kind of infiltration of non-French ideology and wokeism. So the letter that he sent to the French Academy was sent to the secretary, who is one of the very few women who made it to the French Academy, Hélène Carrère-Dancoz. And unfortunately, it's quite small here, so I was hoping to do side translation, but I'm not sure my eyesight is good enough. But if you look at the address of the letter, it's addressed to Madame le Secrétaire Perpétuel. So you've got Madame, which is obviously a feminine term of address, but le secrétaire is the masculine form. And Hélène Carrère-Dancoz has been very insistent on being called Madame le secrétaire and not Madame la secrétaire. Why that word has got exactly the same form in the masculine and the feminine in French. So here again, you have in the use of language some sign of the position of the people who are using them. And I'll go to my own PowerPoint on my computer because I cannot read what it shows on my screen at the moment. So what it says is that I take the liberty to come to you to know your opinion on an initiative that I consider quite not good, and that is carried out by the writers of a dictionary that was thought of as a reference, Le Petit Robert. Indeed, the author wished to integrate in our language words that I don't recognize, and namely Yale and then the different forms, and I'm stunned by that initiative. As guardian of the language, this is what the Academy is known for, could you tell me whether the French Academy has debated on that subject? If not, this orientation of the Petit Robert would be the sign of the entry in our language of the so-called inclusive language. And it's probably something that will bring about wokeism in our language, which is a way of destroying the value that are ours. That isolated campaign by Le Robert is an ideological intrusion, obvious, that basically puts our language, our common language, in a danger as well as its diffusion. So this results in a language that is defiled, yes, exactly, and that bring division among the user rather than unite them. So quite strong wording from Jolivet. So this is something that is a lot more politic than linguistic, obviously, but there has been also some controversy among linguists, especially in Northern America. Some linguists have argued that maybe the Robert had overstepped its role as a dictionary, which is on the one hand to record the usage of words and not to lead the change in the use of words. and also to integrate new words that shows sufficient frequency and dispersion. So what does it mean? Well, frequency, that's quite obvious. And even in the initial inclusion by de Robert, the first word was rare. It's a rare word. Dispersion means that it is used across areas. And obviously, yell is not a word that is really widely used. And this is something that is acknowledged by people who are very much in favor of inclusive and neutral language. And I'm giving here a quote from Florence Ashley, who is a trans woman, a jurist, but who specialized in Montreal on the use of inclusive language and has done some quite interesting reflection on that. And she acknowledged that, well, I don't know if I should use she really, I'll acknowledge that actually the neutral language is little accepted in the dominant social sphere, and that they are found mainly in non-binary, trans and queer subcultures. This is echoed by a site that gives some advice about the use of neutral and inclusive language. And it states as well that, practically speaking, very few writers usually use neutral pronouns, the only exception being journalists writing paper about inclusive language and some students in some activist circles. So here again, the fact that it's not very frequent, not very widespread, is a second criticism. Some people have also noticed that Le Robert had been very careful in what they have published, because in fact the definition of yal they propose is only part of the definition. It is proposed as a pronoun to be used when the gender is unknown, while that word is actually used in trans circles for people who are claiming to be non-binary. So it's a partial definition as well. Some people have also suggested that maybe de Robert had been a bit cynical in this introduction of yal, and have suggested that it might be a marketing coup. And in a way, you know, people have spoken a lot about de Robert, well, some positively, some negatively, but all the publicity comes quite handy when it is all about selling the dictionary, the paper version. And that's quite noticeable also in the reaction. And here is the reaction from Bernard Cerchilini, who is a very well-known linguist in France, who was leading all the reflection for the government at the end of the 90s, where they were discussing féminisation. He was leading the reflection alongside Lionel Jospin at that time. But Bernard Cerchilini happens also to work as an advisor for Larousse. Larousse is the other big French dictionary. So Larousse would be the more like encyclopedic kind of dictionary that every family would have had on their shelf. While Le Robert, well, when I became a student of French, I was advised to buy Le Robert because it was more scientific in a way. So there were two competitors there advocating their point, and there might be more than just linguistics at stake. Okay, so now you've got the background. What about that pronoun yal? Well, this is a fairly recent word in French, and corpus studies show that it started appearing in the early 2010s. Excuse me, so it's about 10 years old. And it started circulating more frequently in militant circles from 2013 onwards. Must be noted that it entered the Wiktionary in 2015, so what Le Robert has done is far from being avant-garde. So that neutral pronoun has got two purposes. So it is, on the one hand, what Le Robert has written, so it's referred to people whose gender is unknown, but also it's a way of referring to people who identify as non-binary. It's worth noting that yel is not the only pronoun that could be used, and there is a series, a range of what is being called neopronouns that are at the disposal of French speakers. In standard French, in general French, we have a third-person pronoun on that is used. So it's used as a neutral when you don't really know who you're talking about. So it is not an ideal candidate because when you say on, it's not a way of really identifying something. You don't really know what it refers to. Another disadvantage of on is that on has shifted in spoken French, for example. We don't use the we, nous, when we speak informally, but instead of saying nous sommes allés au cinéma, we went to the cinema, we will say on est allé au cinéma. So it has too many uses to be very useful. We've got the yel, which is a contraction of il and elle, but there are other candidates for those new pronouns. So some have advocated the use of ul, for example, that comes from universal, or all, or al. Others have been in favor of al, il, pronounced I often, and this is one that Florence Ashley likes for themselves. I think that's the easiest way to put that. L, and there are others more creative for those who see themselves as half girl, half boy, him or him. So we have a wealth of available pronouns for that new non-binary reference. And I found that quite useful little drawing on the Militant website where it shows how people choose to use one pronoun rather than another. Either they see themselves as gender fluid or agender or non-binary. So there is a variety of practice. Now, there is a linguistic problem linked with yel. It's a real brain teaser for linguists, because if we have new words introduced in the dictionary on a very frequent basis, it happens all the time, yel is not a lexical but a grammatical item, and pronouns are obviously much more stable in a language than any noun. And Circellini was making the point in his defense that well, they haven't changed for centuries. That's not completely true, because if you look at the different forms we have in French to refer to people, and I've put the different person, singular, plural, and receive the standard form. We have seen over time some shift in the use of pronouns, and basically there is a bit of a mess there, because the on that used to be the neutral third person pronoun, as I mentioned, is often used informally instead of the we, nous. And we also see the tu, which is the informal second person singular pronoun, can be used now as the old on was used, like it would be used as a general way of referring people. Like, si tu veux réussir tes examens, tu vas travailler. So if you want to succeed in your exam, you will work. The you referring not to a specific person, but you in general. So although there have been some stability in the forms, their function have evolved over time. There are also morphological problems because when you have yell, you have indeed il and l, but if you have that conflation of il and l, that's still something that is on a binary scale. So that's not very appropriate for people who don't recognize themselves along that scale. Some opponents have noticed that he was actually perpetuating a long tradition of the masculine coming first, because in yell you've got il before l. Of course, when you have that new neutral pronoun, it has lots of implication for a gendered language like French, because you will have lots of agreements that will have to be resolved. So there have been some reflection going on, and there are lots of colleagues, especially at the Sorbonne Nouvelle, following Alferraz, who have spent a lot of time trying to put together a grammar of neutral language, and it's very fascinating what they've come up with. Here I've got some recommendation that I found in an article by Florence Ashley. So she recommends, or they recommend, the use of homophones in oral communication. So some words, when you pronounce them, you cannot recognize if it's feminine or masculine because the length is the same. Well, there have been some proposal in previous years, especially when it was more about inclusive than neutral language. So, for example, in 2017, when there had been that primary school handbook that was published that contained feminine, masculine forms conflated as portmanteau forms, there had been a discussion of all the possible way of making the language inclusive, which meant making the feminine more visible. So here you've got a series of way graphically to make the feminine form more visible, but each one of those forms has got some disadvantages. Like, for example, when you have capital letter, well, does it mean that one is more important than the other? When you have the brackets, what is in bracket tends to be accessory. So does it mean that the feminine form is less important? When you have a slash, well, it can mean antagonism. When you've got an hyphen or a dot in the middle, well, those symbols are already used with other meanings in punctuation. So that's confusing. So there has been the suggestion of a point médian. So that point médian is in the middle of the line, so not like the traditional full point. And that has been suggested as a possible solution, but much debated, as you can expect. So alongside those homophones, those way of writing things, there has been also a suggestion to make the language neutral. So to go beyond the masculine-feminine divide and to use new suffixes, new endings for words. So for example, you have words such as auteur, writer, that has got a feminine form that has been existing for a century now, autrice, and also another one, auteure, that's homophone, so quite, well, not so noticeable, that is favored in Northern America. Then you've got other ones like tous, tout, spelled with S and T, so that's a conflation for the form in the masculine and the feminine. It has become quite popular in demonstration, for example, because there had been in France some demonstration about le mariage pour tous, so opening of marriage to all category of population, and that had also led to reaction linked with that inclusive language. But also some more complex change to endings, for example, a new ending for adjective that would take part of the masculine and the feminine, like in that form for heureux, happy. What is also suggested is that maybe within a text you could have an alternance of agreements. So you would have l'étudiante est beau, where you have the noun that is in the feminine form and the masculine for the adjective. You could have also within a paragraph an alternance, so some sentence in the masculine, others in the feminine. So you could have a modular approach where you pick and mix, but we must admit that if you have that kind of example when you switch from one gender to the other, from one sentence to the other, well, we're coming back to the kind of situation I'm dealing with my students, and I put in their copy of reference because you don't remember what the pronoun refers to because it's not the same gender or number as the noun it's supposed to replace. So this is not ideal. On the other hand, if you try to have a more systematic approach, and this is a kind of reflection led by Alferat, for example, it becomes quite complicated as well. Here you've got a graph, again, very small, I'm afraid, that was based on the work by Alferat and put together by Florence Ashley. And basically, it gives you yes or no options. So, for example, if you have a situation, and I go back to my own PowerPoint on my computer because my eyes won't allow me to tell you what's on that slide. So, for example, if you can have the addition of a final letter such as X or Z, or if you change the final E sound by the new digraph made with the A and E, does it sound like a masculine or not? If it does not, well, maybe you can think of changing the ending. So instead of having auteur, you would have auteur, for example. If the suffix is ending with a vowel sound, well, then maybe you will choose one of those alternative endings such as al, at, an, en, ev, er, that are not marked for gender. So you would have écrivain, assassin, for example, instead of assassin, assassin. So as you can see, I don't want to go into lots of details, but it becomes incredibly complicated, and even for linguists, well, you have to pay attention to follow. So obviously you understand that some reservation expressed, for example, by Jean-Michel Blanquer on the fact that it could make things a lot more difficult for pupils. So when you're trying to make the language better and more inclusive, sometimes you can come across some hurdles, and maybe you can make things a bit difficult for everybody, really. There's been waves of change around gender in French, and from the 70s onwards, there had been some work pioneered by people like Marina Jagello, for example, to make women more visible. And there had been lots of effort in the French government in the 80s, when there were more a female minister who'd been very active to use female titles. Then it came again in the 90s, so that was very good for women. But obviously, when non-binary identity are on the rise, having a language that has got feminine and masculine form makes fitting inside that binary model extremely complicated. There has been thus a new wave of more neutral languages in the last 10 years to accommodate an extending LGBT community with coinages, new agreements. And so far, this is only the language of militant or academic circles. Obviously, to start with, that was the case also for feminine form. And after, well, 30 years of resistance, a couple of years ago, the French Academy has accepted that, well, maybe you can say écrivaine instead of femme écrivain. So you never know what can happen. But we need to be aware that those new waves can also bring ripples, and the language that we're using can have an impact on others. And language that was meant to make inclusion easier for a group may mean that other groups will feel more marginalized. And I'm thinking here of some groups. So for example, the accessibility of such inclusive writing system for visually impaired people. For example, that point médian, that dot in the middle, was creating lots of problems for software that are reading out text for people who are visually impaired. Obviously, as technology is improving, I'm sure that this kind of obstacle can disappear, but this is something to take into account. Obviously, when you have form as complex as the one I've shown earlier, well, you make things more difficult for failing pupils, for people with dyslexia. So again, we can exclude other people. You can have problems in implementation because I show you the modular version or the integrated version. So if you choose to pick and mix your approach, well, it can make intercomprehension quite complicated. But if you choose to have a systematic approach to it, well, which form will you favor? Will it be yel? Will it be all? Will it be ul, im? There are several options. So if you choose one and one is accepted, well, maybe you alienate some people who would have rather use another form. And there is also the possibility that we are created new minoritized groups. And I'd like to share with you a personal experience I had earlier this week. I came across a very interesting article on Monday, and it's about a reflection that is led in Switzerland by theologians to try to see how they can make theology more inclusive, and there were proposals to use yel to refer to God. Obviously, this has created quite a bit of a debate, and I shared that on my Twitter account because my Facebook account, sorry, because I thought that's really interesting. And some of my dear old Christian friends reacted and were quite shocked by it. And I was thinking, well, do I answer on my account? Well, I decided to write to them why I thought it was interesting, and maybe it was good to think of your belief in a new context. It's true that in religion there is a lot of imagery about masculine, feminine, like God as a father, Christ and the church as its bride. But you also have verses such as God created a human being in the first chapter of Genesis in his image, both male and female, he created them. So you could argue, well, maybe would be a quite good option in that case. So we need to be aware that when we're talking about making language and life more inclusive, we have to think that what can be seen as an improvement for some could become a hurdle for others. And I would like to finish with that quote from the Déclaration des droits de l'homme et des citoyens, so Declaration of the Right of Man and Citizen, that came in the wake of the French Revolution. Well, obviously, nowadays there are some people who are not very happy with the title L'homme, man. But we need to replace things in their context as well, because when this was created, well, that was quite revolutionary compared to the kind of rights people had at the time. So we need to think maybe that all liberty may have negative impact, and it would be a shame that groups that were maybe ill-treated and treated as minority impose on other groups what they've been through. So that's something we need to keep in mind, I think, when we are thinking about EDI matters in companies, in universities, in our classes. So that was what I wanted to share with you. Obviously, there is a lot more that could be said about it. And there are a couple of very interesting events happening very soon I'd like to mention. Next week, there is a discussion, debate around inclusive language across languages that is organized. And there are people like Sasha Stolens that some of you will know who are taking part. Our colleagues in Paris Sorbonne Nouvelle are organizing next month a conference. Unfortunately, it seems that they won't be able to go online. This is to accompany the publication on the 1st of February of a book edited by Vinay Swami and Mackenzie. So they have asked me to mention it to you, as you might be interested by the book. And for those of you who don't read French, I've also put the link to a previous publication in English that they have. If you are part of the Aston community, this is also a platform I'd like to use to invite you to join Natasha and myself and others who have been interested in issues around inclusive language within the university. And I would like to acknowledge the work Danielle Macaulay, who unfortunately is not at Aston anymore, had done also to make those matters more prominent. So I guess we'll stop here, and then I think we'll stop the recording as well, Natasha, so that people can feel free